Right now, Nissan, once the pride of Japanese engineering, is on life support. Honda, its rival-turned-suitor, is circling like a hawk. And behind the scenes, Saudi Arabia's oil empire is plotting to take control of the entire company. This is not business as usual. This is corporate warfare dressed in diplomacy. If this story ends with a signature, it will create the third largest car maker in the world. But if it falls apart, Nissan may not survive the year. Honda could be dragged into the wreckage. And Japan, once the unbeatable titan of global car manufacturing, might lose its last chance to stay in the electric future. So what really happened? Why is Honda trying to merge with a collapsing rival? Why is Saudi Arabia suddenly in the driver's seat? And what does this mean for drivers, jobs, and the future of every car you buy? What's happening? When Nissan and Honda first began their so-called feasibility study, it didn't make many headlines. Automakers team up all the time. Joint ventures are a common way to reduce costs, share research, and speed up production. On the surface, it looked like a practical move. Develop electric drivetrains and software platforms together, save money, and maybe find some synergy in a world shifting rapidly toward electrification. But inside Nissan, the motivation was far more urgent. The company's financials were dire. Sales continued to decline. Their partnership with Renault was on the verge of collapse, riddled with distrust and resentment since Goen's fall. Suppliers were nervous, banks were nervous, and the board? They were panicking. Honda, by contrast, was in a better position, but not by much. Their electric vehicle strategy had stalled. While rivals like Tesla, Build Your Dreams, and Volkswagen sprinted ahead, Honda was still fumbling its EV rollout. The Prologue, developed with General Motors, wasn't winning hearts or market share. Behind closed doors, Honda's leadership knew they needed help, not just in software or battery tech, but in scale, factories, and international production capacity. That's when the talks began. Carefully worded memos, closed-door meetings. Eventually, the two automakers signed a memorandum of understanding, not legally binding, but a clear signal to the world that something bigger was brewing. Publicly, it was described as a collaboration. Privately, many at Nissan saw it for what it really was, an audition. To some, this was a hopeful development. Two Japanese giants joining forces to build affordable, reliable, high-tech EVs. An all-Japanese alternative to Chinese and American dominance in the electric era. A new national champion. But to others inside Nissan, especially those still clinging to their independence, it felt like something else entirely, a surrender in slow motion. Because while Honda brought capital and confidence, Nissan brought baggage and desperation. But this merger had a hidden agenda, and one side wasn't playing fair. Honda said it wanted a partner, but behind the scenes, it was plotting a takeover, and it wasn't being subtle. Honda's secret power play. As the press focused on the feasibility study, Honda's executive team was quietly evaluating far more than software compatibility. They were studying Nissan's US factory network, they were analyzing its dormant truck platforms, and they were eyeing the one thing Honda didn't have: access to full-size body-on-frame vehicles that could rival Toyota and Ford in the North American market. Honda had the Ridgeline and Pilot, both unibody vehicles with limited towing and off-road capability. Nissan, on the other hand, owned the Titan, the Frontier, the Armada, all built in the United States, ready to scale, and supported by a labor force and infrastructure that Honda would need years to develop on its own. Developing a new truck lineup from scratch would cost tens of billions of dollars. Absorbing Nissan would cost a fraction of that. Then there was the EV factor. While Honda struggled to deliver a viable electric SUV, Nissan, despite its recent failures, still had valuable experience. The Leaf may have flopped, but it was a pioneer. The Ariya may have underwhelmed, but it had a full platform ready for iteration. For Honda, it wasn't just about products. It was about buying time, and maybe, just maybe, buying dominance. If the merger succeeded, the combined entity would instantly become the third largest automaker in the world, behind only Toyota and Volkswagen. That kind of scale would allow Honda to accelerate its electric development, enter segments it had ignored for a long time, and finally challenge its biggest rival at home and abroad. Publicly, Honda insisted the deal would be between equals, but inside Nissan, executives were growing suspicious. The negotiations felt increasingly one-sided. Demands were being made. Suggestions became ultimatums, and then rumors started to spread that Honda didn't just want a partnership, it wanted control. We did the research so you could skip the noise. Now you know why this merger's more than just headlines. If that was worth your time, hit subscribe. Then came one man who could derail the entire plan. Inside Nissan's Tokyo headquarters, one man stood between the company and total surrender, and he wasn't backing down. Makoto Uchida's last stand. He wasn't just blocking a merger, he was willing to sacrifice the company to stop it. Makoto Uchida had been CEO of Nissan since 2019, appointed in the wake of the Carlos Ghosn scandal to stabilize a sinking ship. Quiet, methodical, and fiercely loyal to Nissan's independence, Uchida believed that the company could recover if it remained in control of its own destiny. So when Honda came to the table, promising synergy and cooperation, Uchida listened. But when Honda began demanding that Nissan become a subsidiary, Uchida drew a line in the sand. For him, this wasn't just business, it was personal. The idea that Nissan, a cornerstone of Japan's industrial identity, would surrender itself to a rival brand was unacceptable. He fought the deal at every turn, delayed board meetings, questioned financial assumptions, rallied internal support. At times, it looked like he might win, but Honda had leverage, and Nissan's board, faced with declining forecasts, investor pressure, and the specter of total collapse, was running out of patience. To Uchida, the company's soul was at stake, but to the board, this was about survival. In February of 2025, the tension reached a breaking point. Behind closed doors, a vote was held. The board sided with Honda, and Uchida was out, and just like that, he was gone. But Honda wasn't Nissan's only suitor anymore. The Saudis make their move. As rumors swirled about the collapse of Nissan's merger talks with Honda, a growing tension was building in the Middle East. The Saudi Public Investment Fund, known as PIF, had been watching from the sidelines. This was not their first rodeo. They had already poured more than $8 billion into Lucid Motors, propping up the American EV maker during its rocky post-IPO years. They had also launched their own joint venture with Foxconn, called Seer, to create a new electric vehicle manufacturing ecosystem inside Saudi Arabia. To the PIF, Nissan represented more than a struggling car company. It was an opportunity. With manufacturing facilities in North America, established EV platforms, and a household name across Asia, Nissan was a sleeping giant. All it needed was a financial defibrillator, and PIF had the capital and the strategy to revive it. Talks between Nissan and the PIF reportedly began just days after Uchida's exit, facilitated by intermediaries close to Foxconn. The discussions moved quickly. Unlike Honda, which wanted Nissan to remain a junior partner under the umbrella of a Japanese supermerger, the Saudis were offering something different: near total operational freedom in exchange for majority equity. In other words, Nissan could continue operating as Nissan, but with a new owner pulling the strings behind the curtain. Foxconn's role in all this was subtle but critical. While it had no interest in owning Nissan outright, it saw an opportunity to become Nissan's exclusive contract manufacturer for next-generation EV platforms. The Saudis would inject the money, Foxconn would provide the manufacturing infrastructure, and Nissan would return to the global stage as a re-engineered brand with the backing of oil wealth and tech know-how. The initial terms were bold. The PF offered a multi-stage investment totaling more than $12 billion, enough to wipe out most of Nissan's near-term debt and fund new vehicle development across 3 platforms. But buried deep in the proposed term sheet was a clause that raised eyebrows among Nissan's executive team. The Saudis were demanding an emergency conversion right. If Nissan's stock dropped below a certain threshold within a 24-month window, PIF could convert its investment into a controlling interest. Without further board approval, it was a ticking time bomb. Accept the deal, and Nissan might survive. Reject it, and the company could collapse. Accept it without safeguards, and Nissan might no longer belong to Japan. And buried in the contract, a clause that changes everything: the ghost of Carlos Ghosn. The ghost of Carlos Ghosn looms large over everything Nissan does. It has been more than 5 years since he dramatically escaped Japanese prosecution, smuggled out of the country in a cargo crate bound for Lebanon. But the fallout from his scandal is still shaping the way Nissan makes decisions today. Ghosn's rise and fall is more than just corporate drama. It is a national trauma. Once hailed as the savior of Nissan, the man who orchestrated its partnership with Renault and pulled it back from the brink of bankruptcy. In the late 1990s, Goen became a symbol of excess, betrayal, and foreign interference. His arrest in 2018 on charges of financial misconduct was not just a legal crisis, it was an existential one. Inside Nissan, Gosen's departure unleashed chaos. It exposed deep divisions between the French and Japanese factions of the company. Renault, which held a major stake in Nissan, tried to assert more control in the power vacuum. But Japanese executives, stung by what they saw as a betrayal, pushed back. The alliance between Nissan, Renault, Renault and Mitsubishi began to crumble. Trust evaporated. Today, many in Nissan's upper ranks still view any foreign partnership, whether with Honda, PIF, or Foxconn, through the lens of the Goen era. They fear another slow erosion of autonomy, another creeping takeover disguised as cooperation. And that fear is not unfounded. Recent internal memos reveal that several board members objected to the PF deal specifically because it reminded them of Renault's gradual domination. This is how it starts, one anonymous executive wrote, and it ends with someone else owning our future. Public sentiment is equally fractured. In Japan, Goen is seen by many as a villain, but also as a warning. Letting go of Nissan, even partially, feels to many like repeating the same mistake twice. But the irony is hard to ignore. It was the attempt to block a takeover of Goen's influence, of Renault's control, that led Nissan here in the first place. A company too proud to bend and now too broken to stand. And that's when the Japanese government stepped in. The government's invisible hand. When news of the Saudi offer reached Tokyo, alarms went off, not just in economic circles, but in national security briefings. Nissan is not just another car brand in Japan. It is a pillar of the country's post-war industrial identity. Allowing it to fall into foreign hands, especially ones tied to oil wealth and geopolitical agendas, was seen as a threat far bigger than balance sheets or board votes. Senior officials from Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry began privately pressuring Nissan's board to reconsider the Saudi offer. They didn't issue an outright ban, but their message was clear. If Nissan became majority-owned by a non-Japanese entity, it could face regulatory scrutiny, restricted subsidies, and limited access to government-backed infrastructure programs. This is not the first time Japan has intervened in corporate affairs to preserve economic sovereignty, but this time the stakes were higher. The global electric vehicle race is not just about profit, it's about positioning, influence, and future-proofing national economies. And Japan is already falling behind. Honda, Toyota, and Subaru are scrambling to compete with China's BYD and America's Tesla. Losing Nissan would mean surrendering even more market share, manufacturing capacity, and technological leadership. It would be a signal to the world that Japan could no longer protect its champions. That's why officials began exploring back-channel incentives to keep Nissan in the family. Tax benefits, research grants, and even preferential treatment in global trade negotiations were offered if Nissan could find a domestic path forward. But time is running out. With billions of dollars in play and two powerful bidders circling, Nissan is at a crossroads. The boardroom is fractured, the public is divided, and the government is pulling strings behind the scenes. With time running out, Nissan had one last card to play: the global EV arms race. While Honda and Nissan hesitated in their electric transformation, the rest of the world didn't wait. China's Build Your Dreams surged past every expectation, flooding global markets with low-cost, high-range electric vehicles that didn't just compete, they conquered. In 2023 alone, Build Your Dreams sold more than 3 million electric vehicles globally, surpassing Tesla and shaking the foundation of the Japanese auto industry. Tesla, once untouchable, responded by slashing prices to protect market share. This ignited a brutal electric vehicle price war, forcing every automaker to either adapt or bleed. But while Tesla had the margins to adjust, and Build Your Dreams had the government backing to expand, Japan's giants found themselves in no man's land. Toyota held back, cautious as ever. Honda dabbled, and Nissan, already in crisis, stumbled deeper into irrelevance. By 2024, Japan's share of the global electric vehicle market had plummeted to below 12%. Once the leader in hybrid innovation, Japan now looked like a legacy empire resisting the future. As Chinese brands began exporting to Europe, Latin America, and Southeast Asia, the pressure mounted. Entire regions began shifting away from gasoline, and not with Toyotas or Hondas, but with electric newcomers most Japanese executives had dismissed as copycats only 5 years earlier. Within this context, the Honda-Nissan Feasibility Study wasn't just a business trial, it was a last-ditch response to a global technology arms race. Both companies knew they could not compete alone. Together, they could combine Honda's design prowess and powertrain engineering with Nissan's electric vehicle groundwork and North American truck manufacturing base. If they waited any longer, it wouldn't just be the merger at risk, it would be their survival. But even as Honda and Nissan tentatively reached out to each other, they weren't moving fast enough. The joint plan to co-develop electric vehicle platforms, software systems, and shared factories was still months from execution. Meanwhile, Chinese companies were entering their third generation of electric vehicle platforms, faster, cheaper, and smarter. And just as Honda and Nissan began to plot their move, one of Japan's oldest automakers collapsed in full view of the world. But one company was about to break ranks and expose it all. Mitsubishi collapses in real time. As Nissan and Honda scrambled to stay afloat in a storm they barely understood, Mitsubishi quietly drowned. In early 2024, news broke that thousands of Mitsubishi vehicles were being held at American ports with no explanation. Behind the scenes, it was much worse. Mitsubishi's U.S. dealerships were in freefall. Cars weren't just stuck, they were unsellable. The average Mitsubishi dealership retailed only 17 new cars per month in 2023, down from over 30 during the pandemic recovery. Their margins shrank, their lot space overflowed, and customer traffic dried up. For most, selling used cars became the only viable strategy. Mitsubishi had effectively become a badge on life support, with no investment, no new models, and no future. Then came the news that shook what was left of the network. Mitsubishi had frozen all shipments from Japan. Vehicles were stuck indefinitely in limbo, triggering panic among dealers and raising alarms among investors. The excuse? Tariff risk and pricing volatility. The truth? Mitsubishi was bleeding cash so fast that they could no longer afford to gamble on inventory that might never sell. This wasn't a temporary hiccup, it was a strategic retreat. With no U.S. factories and a lineup almost entirely imported from Japan, Mitsubishi was at the mercy of currency fluctuations, shipping costs, and trade policies they couldn't control. Their only option was to cut their losses. Rumors swirled of a desperate bailout or an emergency rebadge deal with Nissan, Mitsubishi's longtime alliance partner. Some even suggested Nissan would quietly absorb Mitsubishi's operations and fold them into its existing U.S. infrastructure. But those talks never materialized, because nobody wanted to inherit a sinking ship. As Mitsubishi vanished from showrooms and headlines alike, one truth became impossible to ignore. If a century-old car company could disappear without a sound, then no brand in Japan was safe. And in the silence left by Mitsubishi, Foxconn made a decision. And then came the wild card. Lucid's electric Trojan horse. Lucid Motors looked like the least likely savior in the Nissan saga. A niche Californian startup building six-figure electric sedans with sci-fi interiors and executive branding. Lucid was much more, and the Saudis knew it. With over $8 billion in backing from the Public Investment Fund, Lucid had become the jewel in Saudi Arabia's automotive crown. Their technology was not just cutting edge, it was unmatched. Lucid's electric motors were the most efficient in the world. Their drive units broke records. Their inverters, battery management systems, and aerodynamic designs were coveted by every serious automaker still stuck in development hell. And now, through the PIF, Lucid's core tech could be offered to Nissan, not as a competitor, but as a partner. The idea was simple and revolutionary. Skip the decade of development. Let Nissan leapfrog into the premium EV era by embedding Lucid technology under its next-generation vehicles. No more underwhelming Leafs, no more confused Arias. This would be a new Nissan, powered by American tech, backed by Saudi capital, and manufactured through Foxconn's hyper-efficient supply chain. It would be the world's first hybrid automaker, not in fuel, but in structure. Half Japan, half Silicon Valley, and driven by oil money. This wasn't just a rescue, it was a reimagining of what a car company could be in the 21st century. No unions, no outdated factories, no clunky legacy software, just elegant modular vehicles built with efficiency, speed, and global scalability. But there's another future, one that's far more chaotic. The EV war nobody survives. What if everyone fights and nobody wins? That is the nightmare scenario. The future where the Honda merger fails, the PIF deal collapses under political pressure, and Nissan is left to flounder, drifting without a savior. It is a scenario no one wants to consider, but it is rapidly becoming the most likely. In this world, desperation replaces vision. Governments double down on protectionist policies. Trade wars reignite. The United States, already enforcing a 27.5% tariff on electric vehicles from China, expands its restrictions to cover vehicles with any major foreign investment. The European Union retaliates with new barriers of its own. And Japan, caught in the middle, loses its grip on the global stage. Electric vehicle technology, once a tool of unification, becomes fractured. Software ecosystems become incompatible. Charging standards narratives diverge. Intellectual property disputes explode. Each region builds its own walled garden, and innovation suffers. What was supposed to be the great electric revolution devolves into economic balkanization. The human cost is even worse. In the United States, thousands of workers tied to Japanese automakers are laid off. Nissan dealerships close. Supplier contracts dry up. Investment halts. Honda, unable to scale quickly without Nissan, falls further behind in the electric vehicle race. Meanwhile, General Motors and Ford struggle to lower prices fast enough to compete with Chinese imports, even as political pressure prevents them from moving production offshore. In Europe, regulators scramble to rewrite subsidy frameworks as electric vehicle prices crash. Chinese automakers like BYD and NIO flood the market. Local brands like Renault and Peugeot face extinction. Germany, long a pillar of automotive strength, enters a manufacturing crisis. And in China, retaliation is swift. The government accelerates its Belt and Road Initiative to move electric vehicle production into allied countries. Southeast Asia becomes the next battlefield. Cheap labor, fast production, minimal regulation. Japan is left behind. This isn't an electric vehicle war. It is a global economic collapse hiding behind lithium-ion batteries and glossy marketing. And there's still one final question no one's answered. What does Japan do now? 3 Japanese brands may die, and Tokyo's doing nothing to stop it. Nissan is on the brink. Mitsubishi is collapsing in real time. Honda is vulnerable to foreign competitors and running out of time to scale. Together, they represent over a century of innovation, employment, and national pride. But the Japanese government appears frozen. Japan has always approached foreign ownership with caution, even hostility. There are no bailouts coming. No nationalized safety nets. Instead, there's silence. And silence in this case is a slow death. Why the inaction? It's cultural as much as political. Japan's industrial policy has long valued tradition, consensus, and long-term planning. But the auto industry no longer runs on tradition. It runs on speed, flexibility, bold bets, and those are things Japan has been hesitant to embrace. Even when Carlos Ghosn modernized Nissan, his methods were met with skepticism. He was too aggressive, too foreign, too disruptive. And now, with the opportunity for transformation on the table, whether via Honda, the Saudis, or Foxconn, Japan hesitates again. This is more than a branding crisis. This is a collapse of industrial leadership. Japan was the gold standard for a long time. Toyota's Kaizen, Honda's engineering, Nissan's innovation, but the rest of the world caught up, and in many cases it surpassed them. Meanwhile, Japan's domestic auto sales are shrinking. Its youth are less interested in car ownership. Its automakers are aging, both in personnel and product. And while companies like Toyota have found ways to stay ahead, the rest are losing relevance. Without decisive action, Japan could become the next Britain, once a leader in global manufacturing, now a relic. The nation must decide, will it fight to remain a force in automotive innovation, or quietly step aside while foreign capital and foreign companies define the future? Which brings us to the question every driver needs to ask. What should you do now? This isn't just about corporations. It's about your wallet, your job, and your future. For the average person watching this saga unfold, it may seem like distant corporate drama, but the decisions being made today, whether Nissan merges with Honda, gets bought by the Saudis, or disappears entirely, will hit you where it hurts most: your paycheck, your garage, and your long-term trust in who builds the machines you rely on. If you're a consumer, expect disruption. Electric vehicle prices may plummet, but so will service availability, dealer networks, and warranty coverage, especially if Nissan's future remains uncertain. Vehicles built today could be unsupported tomorrow, and used prices, they'll swing violently depending on which way this war breaks. If you're a worker, especially in the US or Japan, your future may depend on whether your plant survives the next wave of restructuring. Foxconn could move production abroad. Honda might consolidate factories. And if no deal happens at all, those jobs could vanish. If you're an investor, tread carefully. Japanese automaker stocks could soar or collapse based on the next headline. This isn't a normal market cycle. It's a generational shift. And those who do not see the full board, PIF's ambitions, Foxconn's role, Lucid's leverage, will be caught flat-footed. But the most important takeaway is this: trust in legacy brands is no longer enough. Every driver, every buyer, every voter needs to start asking harder questions. Where was this car made? Who actually owns the company? What kind of political forces are shaping my future without my consent? So if you've got a take, drop it in the comments. Is Honda the hero here? Should Nissan let go of the wheel? Or is Saudi Arabia the only one bold enough to do what Japan won't? We're tracking every move, every leak, every backroom deal. And if you want to stay ahead of the next twist, hit that subscribe button.